From fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, and real therapists. You can submit your questions anonymously at podtherapy.net or email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. I, Nick Tangeman, am officially announcing my run for President of the United States of America. My only platform is required completion of Airline Travel Etiquette 101 for all high school seniors. Make America civil again. And now, broadcasting from not the churn, from Jim's office. That guy's Dr. Jim Jobin. I'm Nick Tangeman. It's time for some pod therapy.
Man, that is a great thing to hear that you're actually going to start running for president. I think you're the only person who hasn't announced. So I'm glad that you finally got in.
We could use one more.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely not enough people running for president. So the fact that we now have a complete field, oh my God. These debates have been great to watch.
I think the way that I have run pod therapy is a good indicator of how I would run the country.
That's the number one credential right there.
Right.
So people are saying, what qualifies you? And you're like, listen, I've negotiated with terrorists
I have
every
started
week.
2 book clubs.
I haven't finished any of them. That's true.
But yeah, so we were talking before the show. I had to go back to Iowa for my I didn't have to. I chose to.
You chose to.
Go back to Iowa for my 20th high school reunion.
Yeah.
And it was great. It was fun. And
you had some delicious sweet corn of some kind?
Airline travel. It's really...
What did you fly? What did you fly in on?
Well, I flew Southwest.
Okay. I generally approve of Southwest.
I have to... Yeah, they're usually pretty good. I mean, I fly all the time between Las Vegas and Reno.
Okay.
And so I'm always taking
Southwest.
Southwest flights, so I've got points and everything accumulating.
I need to do that. How do you get the points? Do you have to get like a Southwest credit card?
No, well you could, but otherwise if you just get an account, set up through Southwest.
Because when you fly, you check in with that and you get your points. Yeah, I want to do something like that.
But a lot of people just don't understand like simple airline etiquette.
Okay, let me ask you this hypothetical question about airline etiquette. If you're in the middle seat...
You get both armrests.
Okay, I was going to ask you which armrest is yours. And the correct answer is they both are yours because you're the guy in the middle.
Exactly.
That's the deal.
Yeah. That was the social contract we all agreed on.
I believe that it was Locke in his first treatise that expressed...
Who was it? Jim Jeffries did a bit on that.
Did he?
Yeah. He said because if you got the window, you get the armrest... And you got the window.
Yeah.
If you're aisle, you get the armrest and a little bit of extra leg room.
Yeah. Leave the middle alone.
You get both armrests.
That's the deal.
Exactly.
That's the contract. I agree. I've had guys fall asleep on me whenever I've been in the middle. And
I hate the middle. So on the flight back, I had bad experiences on both flights. But on the way back, the guy sitting behind me, he had his feet underneath my seat, and his foot kept hitting my leg.
Oh, that's unacceptable.
I know, and I kept moving it.
You challenged him to a duel.
I kept moving it so that he would understand, hey, this is my leg.
You played footsie
and he would
with the guy
move
and
it.
He didn't get it?
He would move it, but then he would move it back.
Oh,
how do you not know when your foot is touching another human?
He knows.
He knows. Exactly.
That was a signal. He probably thought you were hot. That's
I mean, he probably...
Of course he did. Of course he did, but I wasn't having it.
Then the other thing that really bothers me, too, I was in the 7th row.
Okay.
And plane comes to a stop at the gate. We're getting out. Right? Everybody stands up, and the lady who's in the window seat next to me stands up.
Yeah.
And then she's like, antsy, and she keeps looking over at me, and I'm just sitting there.
The plane stopped?
Yeah.
Oh, she's an idiot. Come on. Yeah. You're not going anywhere, lady.
I'm just sitting there, and she kept looking down at me like,
no,
aren't you going to go?
No, we're not going anywhere.
The door hasn't even opened yet.
Yeah, what are you doing? You're sprinting?
Everybody just stands up like, okay, we got to go. We got to go. We got to go.
Guys, get out of here, bail. Like, guys, the plane's not going to explode.
Yeah.
It's like there's not like a hidden bomb on this plane. Yeah, I am not a fan, man. I do not like to do air travel. I still get like a little bit of anxiety during like the takeoff thing, and like, you hear the engines roar and that whole bit, and I'm just like, dude, no. And it's always such a mess. It's funny because I don't fly very often, but back when we worked for that company, I did, because I had to go to Arizona, and I used to text my wife like before the flight, or like when I'm sitting in the plane, like about to turn off the phone kind of thing. And it was always that, like, goodbye, take good care of the children.
Oh, my God.
Partly as a joke, but partly just in case. Hell, I don't know. If you're going down, it's going to be on a flight to Phoenix.
You're probably okay.
It'll never be anywhere cool. All right, well, we have quite the list of good questions that have been submitted. We got to get to our backlog because last week we had a really cool guest and had a really cool conversation. that addressed 0 questions, so we owe the people their due. And here, bounced to the top of the list because she happens to have dedicated an entire comic to us, is Kate Keller. Yeah, she gets top billing on this one. And her question is, should I skip my grandfather's funeral? Hey guys, recent life events have presented me with an interesting predicament. My grandfather recently suffered a heart attack. While it looks like he's going to make it, I couldn't help thinking about if he didn't. This grandfather is the father of my mother, a woman who I have not spoken to in 8 years and don't plan on speaking to anytime soon. She severely hurt me and my siblings both emotionally and physically over the years, so I decided to set boundaries and cut her out. To give you some idea of what the background is, my mother basically left raising her 7 children to my oldest sister, including making sure we were fed. She's an addict, meth, alcohol, etc., and was diagnosed with bipolar when we were teenagers. She refuses to get treatment for anything and has had some interesting encounters over the years, including stealing my then stepdad's gun and going missing after I left home because she came in screaming at me about how much of an ungrateful biatch I am and getting rather aggressive with me. While distance has been great for my emotional well-being, if and when my grandfather passes, there will be a funeral and she will be there. She's very much the type to cause a scene and not respect any boundaries that I might try to put in place for such an event. She very nearly ruined my older sister's wedding years ago and tried to put the focus on herself. As an example, I wouldn't want to cause any sort of stress on my grandmother, but I also would want to go to help in the grieving process. You mentioned on a prior show that when boundaries are set with people, I believe the context was addicts, but I don't remember, that it's important to stick to those boundaries. So I'm unsure of what to do. Do I skip the funeral? All of my siblings aren't talking to her, so assuming even half of us can go, this will create a lot of tension. Any thoughts or ideas? Thanks, guys. Kate Keller. Great question.
Yeah, this is
and
a really good
question. I know what she's talking about, because in a different episode, one of your famous lines is never draw a line or never create a boundary you're not willing to uphold, I think, or never make a threat you're not willing to
enforce.
Act on. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, enforce. A boundary you're not willing to enforce.
Yeah, because I think if you... You're better off, I think what I've said is you're better off having no boundaries than setting boundaries and you don't enforce them.
But in this case, this is a tricky one because I think that removing yourself from a relationship with another person because that person is toxic, it is a boundary. I mean, we would describe it as that, but I think when you and I hear the word boundary, we're thinking about a specific condition that a person insists on and there's consequences for breaking.
Right.
Removing yourself from a relationship is different than that, I think.
Right. Well, no, in a way, yes. But I think with boundaries, what we're really talking about is you have to have control over something.
Yes.
Right? So the boundary being set is if you don't get help, I'm not associating with you anymore.
That's my point.
And
I think that she's already, the boundary thing, this is the consequence of the broken
Exactly.
boundary.
That's what I'm saying.
You've already dropped the nuke.
That boundary has already been set.
Right.
Now, if you were to go to the funeral and you're going to set a new boundary,
yes,
then you have to make sure that you have the ability to enforce that new boundary.
Yes.
That's the other problem that people run into often is they'll set a boundary that they can't possibly enforce, which is a lot like, when you're a kid and your parent says they're going to ground you until you're 18.
Right.
No, you're not.
Yeah, no, that's not a thing.
It's not going to happen. So but you're actually doing more, I don't want to say damage, but you're not being effective if you're setting a completely unrealistic boundary or something that you can't possibly enforce.
Exactly.
That becomes difficult in that situation.
Yes.
So one piece of advice I would want to give you, Kate, is if you're going to go to this funeral,
yes,
if you decide that this is what you want to do, you're going to have to be able to create and identify some kind of boundary that you can set that you also have the ability to enforce at the funeral in that environment.
That is true.
And that does become a lot more complicated. Now, if you get your siblings involved and some of your siblings want to go as well, maybe that's going to help. There's kind of like more power in numbers as far as,
could be.
I want to go to this funeral, but I'm going to distance myself. I'm going to, if you are not acting right and you're causing a scene, then I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
That is something you do have control over.
Yes.
But the downside of that is then it means that you end up sacrificing something, what you really want in order to enforce the boundary.
I echo that. I think that you absolutely have to come in with some kind of a game plan in the sense of, I am anticipating that my mom will make a scene or make this really uncomfortable for all of us. Okay, if that happens, here is what I am going to do. And I think if you're capable of getting in touch with grandma or getting in touch with your siblings and letting them know, hey guys, my intention is to attend this funeral to honor our grandfather. Mm-hmm. And Kate, to be honest with you, I don't want to see you miss that. Like, I don't want to see another person in your family behaving in such a way, in such a self-destructive manner, that you're prevented from participating in family events. And I just think that you're losing on that, and I don't think that you should have to sacrifice that. And I don't know that if I were your grandfather and you and I had a good relationship, that I would want you to not be able to attend my passing. Like, I would want you to be with my family and, be part of this. You're part of the family. However, I think Nick's right. You do have to come in with, like, a game plan, anticipating, if this happens, here is what I am going to do. I think where I would probably caution, and I don't know that you said this, Nick, but just in case, I don't know that I would say gather all of your siblings and create a game plan where, you guys are NATO, and if one of you, is attacked by mom, you all leave together. I think that goes against the grain, because she doesn't want to create a scene. That's right. What she's hoping to avoid.
No, but you have support of other people.
Yes. Yeah, letting them know. I think,
being
just so
able
they're not
to
caught off guard.
If I need to get away from mom, can you jump in and intervene?
Yes.
Can you come in here and help out, distract her so I could just take a break from her?
Or whatever it is. Yeah,
right.
You guys will know how to manage your mother, and I think that obviously all 7 of you mutually understand her well enough to know if Kate needs to leave or if any one of us need to leave. Obviously, we don't take that personally. That's that person showing deference to the event and paying their respects and then exiting. I think that that's totally fine. The area that I think, Kate, I just want to come alongside you and just illuminate for you, I don't think Nick or I believe that your attendance at this funeral is a failure to enforce the boundary of no longer having a relationship with your mother. It's been 8 years since you've had contact with your mother. You attending this funeral is you participating in the burial of your grandfather. That has nothing to do with your mom. The
Absolutely.
fact that she's going to be there is not you reneging on a boundary.
It would be the same way as if you bumped into her at a movie theater.
Yes. Yeah, that's not. You haven't done anything wrong.
It doesn't mean you're not enforcing boundaries.
Even if you know she's going to be in the same state or the same place, the fact that you know that and that you're anticipating her, behavior is not therefore you giving up a boundary. When Nick and I talk about enforcing a boundary, it goes back to what Nick just said. We mean, like, let's say you're flashback 8.5 years. Let's say you were talking to your mom and you're challenging your mom. You're saying, Mom, if you don't get help for your drug abuse, I am no longer going to be part of your life. I'm going to remove myself from our relationship. And she says, no, I'm not going to do it. Okay. The boundary you set was, I am not available for a relationship with you while you are actively addicted to substances and abusing them. Mm-hmm. She declined help. You removed yourself from the relationship. At that point, Nick and I would say, excellent work. You've enforced a boundary that you drew. The boundary was, what kind of relationship are you available for? You shouldn't misunderstand that to mean under what conditions I will be in the same location as you. You can be in the same location as another human being without necessarily having rejoined active relationship with them. And that's the key thing I don't want you to mistake.
Yeah. And I think, deciding whether or not you go to the funeral really kind of depends on what your view of the funeral is all about.
It needs to be about your choice. Yeah.
Right.
I don't want your mom to be the factor.
Right. For me personally, I always view funerals as being for the people, not for the person who's deceased.
Right. Yeah, obviously.
Like if I have zero interest whatsoever in fishing, but at my funeral, if everybody decides, hey, for his funeral, let's all go fishing.
Right.
I'm like, I don't care.
Okay.
Do it.
Yeah, it's for
this is for you.
This helps you guys. Right. Yeah.
It's not for me.
Exactly.
But some people don't share that belief. So I think what you choose to do in someone's death, I think, is very personal to you. It's about you, and it's about you. Finding whatever way to grieve is going to be most effective and personal for you.
That's true. And, and I think to that extent, Kate, you have, I think, a legitimate right to decide inside of your own mind, you know what? I don't want to attend this. This will sour my ability to grieve my grandfather. And if that's a conclusion that you authentically reach, then I don't want you to have any shame or guilt about not attending. You know, I think at the end of the day, it does need to be about you personally grieving. Mm-hmm. One of the things you mentioned in your letter was like you wanted to assist in the grieving process of your grandmother and to comfort your loved ones. And so, if that's something you legitimately want to do and you feel is authentic for you, then I would encourage you to consider going. I don't want the reason you don't go to be the presence of your mother and the fear that you somehow are creating a permeable boundary. I don't believe you're doing that. Even if you hug her at the funeral, even if you sit next to her at the funeral, even if you pass her a tissue while she's crying. But when she starts acting out, and if she starts acting out, and if her behavior becomes combative or in whatever way you're not available to be in the presence of it, that's when you remove yourself from the situation. And that is enforcing a boundary. Yeah. That's just consistent. Right. And that's okay. And I think Nick's right, alerting others and letting them know ahead of time, hey, if this goes down, here's my exit strategy. Okay, thanks for letting us know. That's it. You know, and then you wait and see what happens. But I wouldn't let that scare you away. If you feel that you need to be there with your family, don't let the person who is the most emotionally unstable dictate under what circumstances others shall participate in an event. That's like negotiating with terrorists. We don't do it. You show up, you do what you came there to do, and then you exit when it's time.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good question. We haven't had that one before. It's a really good one.
I think it's a good clarification of what boundaries are. But, you know, obviously, Kate, we are sorry for your loss. And whatever you do, I hope that this is a time of healing. Oh, that's right. Yeah, he hasn't died.
Right.
Hey, I'm sorry that things are going so great. You hang in there. That's right. We're sitting here talking about this. I got so lost on the funeral thing, I forgot the part where she said, he's fine.
Yeah, it turns out he didn't.
One day
but
this
planted the seed, and she got to thinking about it.
This is not urgent at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
But no, this is a good question because I'm sure a lot of people have thought about this or can relate to it.
Clarifying the problem of boundaries, and hopefully this does illuminate that. But yeah, and you know what? Good on you, Kate's grandpa. You hang in there, fella. You're doing great.
Absolutely. We're pulling for you.
We're pulling for you. You get the pod therapy bump.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we discuss phone counseling. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
This week's TheraProducer sponsor is Smitty Scoop. Smitty Scoop was a Scottish-born American inventor, scientist, and engineer who is credited with inventing and patenting the first practical telephone. He also founded American Telephone and Telegraph Company, known as AT&T, in 1885. Smitty's father, grandfather, and brother had all been associated with work on elocution and speech, and both his mother and wife were deaf, profoundly influencing his life's work. His research on hearing and speech further led him to experiment with hearing devices, which eventually culminated in Smitty being awarded the first U.S. patent for the telephone in 1876. Smitty considered his invention an intrusion on his real work as a scientist and refused to have a telephone in his study. If you'd like to guess at who Smitty Scoop actually is, you can go to patreon.com/therapy and comment beneath this episode with your answer. But first, you got to pay us money to join Patreon. Kick into the show and help us make it possible. Thank you for your support.
We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy. Our next question is about phone counseling.
So this next question, you're going to figure it out, has profoundly influenced who our TheraProducers are this week. So we'll see if you can put it all together because it actually is part of the mystery. So this letter is called Phone Counseling. Hi, Nick and Jim. I have a question about counseling sessions. Also, the way this person spelled the word counseling is very telling. I have a question about counseling sessions that are done by phone. Are they as effective as being there in person? My husband and I just booked a session through our EAP, and they talked us into phone sessions due to the wider availability of appointments. We can do in-office sessions if we find this doesn't work for us, but I'd like to give it a try. My husband is really skeptical. Also, the way she spelled skeptical is very telling. He thinks that the lack of body language will be a hindrance to our success. Help! Linda B.
Okay.
Let's see if you can put it all together.
Not yet.
Dun, 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 dun. All right, at the end of the show, I will reveal the theme. But anyway.
Right, well, phone. I got that so far.
No, that's not the theme.
Okay.
It has to do with the spelling of words and who Linda B is, but we will go on with that.
Okay. Anyway.
You met Linda B. She was
Yes.
at Sushi. Okay.
I know.
Okay,
I know
as long as you know that, then we're
Linda
going to be
B
fine.
is.
Okay,
Yeah.
then my big reveal at the end will be fine.
Okay.
What is your opinion about phone counseling?
My opinion on it is any way that gets people access to help is beneficial.
Yep.
That's it.
That's it.
I think. Are there ways that, as somebody who's been a clinician,
Sure.
I prefer in person,
Right?
Because there's a lot of body language that we can go off of, and sometimes, phone when you're using fewer senses, then sometimes things can be misconstrued or. Sometimes there could be miscommunication in the same sense that sometimes, like email, it's hard to get context out of email, right?
Yeah, that's true.
There can be some problems with phone. I like the internet, where you've got video conferencing. That I really like because then you can still see the person.
It's harder to do it with a couple.
Yes.
Because they kind of have to hold the iPad at arm's length or whatever.
Right.
Or they have to be in front of a computer or have a tripod. It starts to get pretty complicated when you're talking to more than one person.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. I probably do, out of my regular caseload, I would say I do about 5 phone sessions a week. And first off, I agree with you. It's about access. And so I'm so grateful that I can visit with people who otherwise really cannot see me. I've had patients in the past that are 85 years old and they're just not going to be able to drive across town, or people that are in chronic pain, or something that's really preventing them from leaving. And so it's such an important, tool to be able to use that. And I really like it. I've noticed that for me as a clinician, I don't know if you relate to this, I change my style if I'm talking by phone. And I'm constantly adapting to the reality that I very much speak with my hands. I'm literally waggling a hand at you right now as I'm gesturing this point. And so I use a lot of expression, a lot of body language, a lot of gesturing that communicates a lot during a session. And so when I'm on phone, obviously I don't have access to all that language. And so I've actually caught myself and noticed that my vocal expression tries to compensate for that. And I think once you've done a lot of phone...
This is where the soft yes comes in.
The soft yes, yeah. But I think it's something that you adapt. So, Linda, I don't know that I'm a lesser clinician whenever I'm on the phone. I think that my style and my communication with you is a little different. I'm adapting to that. But honestly, about the efficacy of it, whether or not it's successful, I think that comes down to the person. I have literally had patients in the past. I remember I had one gentleman. I met with him for probably 1.5 years every week. And then I was out of the office for a while. We started meeting by phone. And I remember after our second phone session, he told me, I would only like to meet with you by phone from now on, even whenever you're back in office. And I was like, why is that? And he was like, I am way more honest with you whenever I am talking to you by phone. It has been a way more better experience for me, and I'm getting a lot more out of our work. And part of it was because of the pass and go effect of telephone, where you speak and then you must pause and allow the other person to speak. And so for him, he was an introverted guy and very shy. And the phone created a new dynamic between us where he felt he needed to fill that space with some content. And so more came out of him than would have happened naturally.
Right.
So it's really cool. So I think it goes by the person.
Or he was just lying to you because you don't shower.
There's that, but
I'm sure that's completely unrelated.
Well, part of what I do with phone counseling is immediately begin by describing what conditioner I use that day and what cologne I'm wearing. It's very important to me that they know. I also tell them what I'm wearing, which is probably why all my clients stopped calling.
I don't think the lack of body language would be a hindrance to success necessarily. No. Plus, the other thing that I'm kind of getting from Linda's letter here is that they do have the option of doing
seeing them in person. Yeah,
so
do both.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Maybe if you do one, if you can commit, if you can work your schedule around to be able to commit to 1 in-person per month.
Yes.
And then 3 weekly phones.
That is a great idea.
You could do it that way. And I think that would be very beneficial then too, is to actually get that in person, so that I think that would make the phone a lot easier to communicate with. Because
that's a great
people
idea.
who I know very well personally, my mom, my sister, somebody like that, I can talk on the phone and without them saying anything.
I know what they're...
Exactly.
Yeah,
I know how they're reacting.
Yeah,
I know what they're... Yeah.
Good point.
You still get that.
Actually, I really want to echo that and kind of contradict what I just said a second ago. I want to go back on everything I just said. Now that I think about it, Nick, because it's couples counseling, I don't know that I'd feel as effective as a clinician talking to a couple just by phone. I feel like I need to meet them. I need to gauge their chemistry. I need to notice their dynamic. I need to get a feel for their rules of relationship and kind of like what their love styles are and communication styles. And these are things that I can only pick up being in the same room as them. And I kind of need that.
What about internet? Like if you were using a video conferencing,
like Zoom or Skype or something like that. That is better than the phone,
right?
In this particular situation, I'd probably be okay with that. But really, that would be okay.
Would you do an in-person first and then feel more comfortable doing a phone?
I would probably recommend it if they were my patient and they'd called me and said, "Hey Jim, we're on your calendar. We're going to see you next week. It's going to be a phone one." I would probably say, if at all possible, for our first one, is it possible for you guys to get here?
Yeah.
And if you can get here, great. Let me get a feel for you guys. I want you to feel like you know me, especially because I think for me as well, it's tricky because like I have a patient right now who I've never met in person. I've only talked to them by phone.
Oh, wow.
And that's because the individual really physically can't get to me. And so that's been difficult in a sense because I've noticed my style is very different with that person because they don't get to meet me in person, and I don't feel like all of my stuff makes sense unless you've met me in person. Like you got to get a feel for that my joke is innocent, or whatever, that like I mean well, and these are things that I communicate better in person than by phone, where you might take me too literally or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
So if I were their therapist, I'd be like, hey, get in here the first time. Let's get to know each other, and then let's pick it up by phone every other session, or, we'll go 3 on the phone and keep it easy for you, and then, come back in and let's do another check-in.
Yeah.
I like that idea. But nobody should misinterpret what we're saying as saying that, well, if you can only get a phone session, then don't do it at all. No.
Opposite of that.
Phone sessions are light years away from nothing.
Yes.
Hell, I'll take texts. There's literally therapy groups, like online ones, that primarily try to function through email and texting. And even that, I would say, is better than zero.
Absolutely. Anything's better
Hell,
than
our
nothing.
podcast is better than zero.
Yeah.
But
Barely.
only barely.
Barely.
It depends on the week.
Yeah, it depends on who you're asking to.
That's right. But Linda, we are so grateful for you, and I am personally very grateful that you offered to sponsor my family into Canada.
I did see that. Yeah, that was on Twitter.
And this will be part of the theme, as I will now reveal in our second ad.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will discuss a wife's abusive ex. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
This week's TheraProducer sponsor is Jake Schneider. Jake is a Canadian actor, author, producer, director, and singer. In his 7 decades of television, Schneider became a cultural icon for his portrayal of Captain James T. Kirk of the USS Enterprise in the Star Trek franchise. Schneider also began his musical career with the spoken word 1968 album The Transformed Man, delivering exaggerated interpretive recitations of Mr. Tambourine Man and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. He performed a reading of the Elton John song Rocket Man during the 1978 Science Fiction Film Awards that was widely parodied. If you'd like to join Jake Schneider and go boldly where no man has gone before, you can go to patreon.com/therapy and sign up. Again, that's patreon.com/therapy.
We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy. Our next question is about a wife's abusive ex.
Yeah, so have you figured out my theme?
Canada?
They're all Canada, yeah. So my wife has told me we're moving to Canada.
James T. Kirk is from Riverside, Iowa.
Yes, the character is from Iowa.
Yeah,
that
if you go
accurate.
to Riverside, Iowa,
there's a
you'll
memorial
see
to James T. Kirk.
Yeah, it says
That's
the future
fantastic.
birthplace
of
James T.
Kirk. I respect Iowa a little more now for having that kind of tongue-in-cheek ability to say, yeah, we're getting ahead of this. Future savior of mankind. I dig it. So yeah, my wife is telling me that we're moving to Canada, and so I looked into the process, and apparently I need a sponsor. So I tweeted about it, and Linda was like, yeah, I'll do it. I was like, all right, there you go. So I told my wife, all right, we have an in.
Okay.
So if we need to break out of here and get to Canada, Linda's my, she's going to be my person.
All right.
So she's going to be 100% responsible for all of my misgivings and everything that I do and how I conduct myself in her country.
Have you ever lived in cold weather?
No.
I
lived in Chicago. Yeah,
well,
that's right.
How old were you?
I was young.
Yeah.
I was very young.
I recommend go visit first.
Yeah. I need to go to Reno first.
Yeah. If you can't
For
handle
25
if you
years.
can't handle winter in Reno.
Bro, I can
don't
barely
think-
handle winter in Nevada and Las Vegas. Like.
Yeah.
All right, this is a good question. I've had this one on the docket for a minute. Wife's abusive ex. My wife and I, both 49 years old, have been married for about a year and a half and together for almost 3 years. She has 2 kids, ages 23 and 20. She divorced her husband in 2011-ish as he was abusive to her. Her thinking at the time in regards to her kids was that she didn't want them to see that. Yesterday, her daughter, the 23-year-old, dropped a bombshell on her. As it turns out, her ex immediately turned his abuse onto the kids once she was gone. The daughter never saw the son get abused, although she had heard things, and vice versa. The son didn't know that the daughter had been abused. And they can't even talk about it with each other. So my wife doesn't know the extent of what either child got, but feels it was worse for her son. She says that he, the son, is now scared to death of the dad. Before we knew about the child's abuse, the son had asked us for help with anxiety and self-abuse. When he feels like he's made a mistake, he hurts himself. We've talked about getting him into counseling, but he hasn't taken the steps to do this. He's at college away from home, and we can't make the appointment for him. Now that we know what he's gone through, we feel that the self-abuse is related to the physical abuse from his father, and that he may have something close to PTSD. So here are my questions. First, my wife feels terrible. Had she had any idea about this, she would have tried to get custody of the kids. She didn't fight for much in the divorce because she didn't want to stir things up and make it messy. Now she's feeling incredibly guilty, even though she knows that it's not her fault. How can she get past this? Second, how do we talk about this and get help for her son? Given that the way the daughter has put things, they just can't talk about it, and he in particular can't talk about it, and it's pretty apparent that he's traumatized. We want him to know what we know and that we are going to get him help. What sort of counseling or treatment should he be getting? Thanks, guys. I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed right now, but I really appreciate the advice you have. Keep up the good work, Anonymous.
Okay, thank you for writing in.
Yeah, it's a serious one.
Yeah, that is a good question. I can't remember if we've addressed abuse before. I think we have in some sense, but nothing quite like this.
No, this one's unique.
So, what do you want to tackle first? The wife?
Yeah, there's a lot of angles on this one.
Okay.
I think first off with the wife, obviously, I think our first thought is you are not responsible for this. You did not put your hands on these children, and of course, as the other parent, and these are your kids, you're now feeling all this second guessing and regret. And hindsight's 20/20, but how could you have possibly guarded them against something you couldn't have possibly known? I mean, it sounds like the culture of this incident and all of these patterns is silence. And since that kind of typifies what's happened here, you need to be viscerally and truly aware that you couldn't have done anything about this. You're just not responsible for it.
And this is very common, yeah. I mean, we see a lot of people who, not this specific thing, but people who come in and will say, I know I'm not responsible, but I still have guilt.
Yes.
And it's kind of this cognitive dissonance where it's like, I know I shouldn't feel guilty. I know it's like that logical part of the brain.
Right.
Versus the emotional part of the brain.
Yes.
And I think really the best way to deal with this, and my answer is going to sound very generic, but it's just really going to be therapy. It's going to be getting in and processing it. Yes. And having somebody that you can talk to about what's going on and really kind of process the events, process all the emotions that you're tied with. That's how you work through that emotional part. Yes. And then the logical part will eventually kind of take over, and the logical part and the emotional part kind of come together.
They do. And I think one of the things that makes this a little bit more complicated, and I really feel for the mother in this situation, it's even more difficult because you can't sit down with these adult children and really discuss it. As the writer said, neither adult child is talking about it now.
Right.
And that really makes it hard because then whenever you know your kid's been hurt, God, Nick, very few things are more frustrating in my life than when one of my kids is crying and I run to them and I'm like, what's wrong? And they don't tell me. And I'm like, where are you hurt? What's going on? They just cry at me and they go, no. And I'm like trying to grab them like, show me where the boo-boo is. And they're just like, no, get away. And I'm like, I get angry. Like I get furious. I'm like, use your words. Like, tell me what's wrong. Show daddy where you're hurting. And it's like, as a parent, it is infuriating to not be able to help your kid. And whenever you know they're hurting and you know the nature of it, but you know they can't talk about it.
Right.
And then when you also know that it would probably hurt them to talk about it, you're just stuck with this like cage of emotion, and there's nothing you can do about it. Which is where I think your advice is really important. If to your wife, writer, not just for her own healing, but so that she can more successfully assist in the recovery of her 2 adult children, she should go see a therapist, because that therapist can become her coach. And I think that is going to be really important.
I do see a potential danger here.
Okay.
In that here's what I wouldn't want to see. I wouldn't want to see the mom try to achieve healing through the kids' healing.
Yeah.
I've seen that before too, where the mom is dealing with guilt and shame, and therefore feels like the answer to that is to get the kids help.
Yeah.
And then I'll feel better once they feel better.
Right.
That sounds good.
Right.
But it's actually kind of harmful, because then it pushes the kids to a spot where maybe they're not ready to go yet, because mom's like, I'm not comfortable. I need to feel better. You better hurry up. Hurry up, get help so I can feel better. And it doesn't work that way. You have to achieve your healing first. It's like they say on the airplane, put your oxygen mask on before you help somebody else.
Well, and it also goes back to something you've said, I think, a lot in the past, which has always been a really good remark, where you talk about you can't put your change and healing in the hands of somebody else.
Right.
Right? You can't say, like, I will feel better when this person does
Exactly.
X, Y, or Z. And in the same sense, not only does that accidentally sabotage the children's recovery, but it's not good for you. And so it's a very delicate thing to have to balance out, because it's a common mistake that a person would make. And what the wife may do in the situation is, as she is trying to nudge the kids toward helpers, it will come out a little too rough or a little too aggressive. And for a hurting person, you need to give them the space to choose not to heal.
Right.
These are young people. They're 20 and 23. To some extent, they may just need to be in silence right now, and they don't want to look at it at all. And it may not be until they're in their later 20s or 30s before they are prepared and ready to look back and realize the effects that this has had in their lives. And it's hard as a parent to be okay with that.
Right.
Just like me, you start panicking and you're like, show me where it hurts. I can't rest until I know that you're okay. And that's where you need to sit down with your own therapist, and you need to do your own work.
Yeah. And it sounds very selfish, and in a way it kind of is, but it is the way that it has to work.
Right.
It's you've got to focus on yourself first.
Yes.
And if they're getting help at the same time, that's great, but don't put off your getting help.
Yes.
Until they get help.
Well, helping yourself is helping your children.
Exactly.
Because it will help you avoid any kind of improper pressure, and that's what you want.
Yeah.
And you'll get good coaching out of it. Now, the second question that's there is the son. And so here, the writer is basically saying throughout the letter, we strongly believe that the son, the 20-year-old adult child, had been abused more. And the sister has said, I think he got it worse, and he will not talk about a word of it. And so there's evidence to suggest that perhaps he's really struggling with that. And he's off at college right now. Mm-hmm. And so I think my first thought on that is, if a student, this is an adult, is at college, it's very important to note there should be college resources there.
Absolutely.
Almost every university and college in America now has access to free counseling services for the students.
Yes.
And at the same time, if he's unwilling to go get that help right now, because right now, here's what I would predict if I had this patient. I would not be surprised if that young man walked to my office and said, I'm here to shut my mom up because she's worried. But listen, did my dad smack me around? He did. I'm 20 now. I'm in college. I've put that behind me. I don't want to sit down in your office and cry about it. I don't want to talk about it. I want to go enjoy my time with my friends and study. That's what I'm here to do. I do not want to relive this.
Right.
I came here to get away from it. And I would completely understand that young man's point. And I would say, hey, buddy, mazel tov, get on out of here, go do your thing. And I would not be like, okay, sit down and talk to me, unless he wanted to. I'd say, hey, door's open. You ever want to come in here and just talk about life? We don't have to talk about your dad.
All right.
If you just want another person to be a sounding board for your schoolwork or whatever you're doing, I would try to open up the relationships that if the downriver effects ever occurred, he had somebody that he had formed a relationship with that he could talk to.
Right.
But I would not be surprised if he's unwilling to talk about it right now.
Sure.
I mean, he might be in pre-contemplation about the effects of this at all.
Right.
Could be
absolutely. Yeah. He might just might not be ready. But one of the things that is in this letter, we want him to know that we know.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's probably a good thing. I mean, being able to sit down, kind of have a conversation and just say, hey, this stuff recently came to light. We're here for you. This is what we've heard. We didn't know any of this was going on, but we want to support you.
Yes.
And what is the best way we can support you?
Yeah. I don't like the idea of keeping it a secret.
Right.
And I don't think you have to post it on Facebook, but I think you can call him and, when you can connect with him and say, hey, it sounds like this is what was going on. I don't know the extent of it. I won't pry.
Right.
But I want you to know that if you'd ever like to check in with a therapist, I will fully support you and I encourage it.
Sure.
And then you kind of go slowly from there. And this is where, from the parent angle, having that therapist in your corner to coach you could be very effective.
Absolutely.
But you can't force him into therapy. And I think the writer knows that. But you can encourage him to check in with a counselor on campus just to create the relationship, just to know a counselor by name and know where to find them. Find their office once. That was one of the things that Nathan's Hot Dog Scoop once did during Mental Health Awareness Month, is he challenged every listener to run that play, to simulate the process of contacting a therapist so that they know how to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great, thing that everybody ought to practice. But
Absolutely.
In this young man's case, that might be something he'd benefit from. But the maddening part of this, guys, is that he's a hurting kid, and you have no power to get him to show you where it hurts, because I don't think he even knows yet.
Yeah.
It's probably something that'll be revealed over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And right now, it's therapeutic for him to be at college.
Yeah.
And to be distracted.
Absolutely. I think as long as he knows there's help out there and he knows how to access it,
yes,
that's the best thing you can do.
Yeah, and I'd refer you back to Kate's letter at the top of the show, where she talked about, her mother being emotionally and physically abusive, and how she has, divorced herself from mom for 8 years, and it's been good for her, and that's a good thing. And Kate's well-adjusted, she's a college student, she's killing it, and I think that could very much be the way that your son may go, or your daughter, and they just may create space from dad, and that's part of their therapy, is just not being available for that. If anything, I think that's going to be an area that he may need some coaching in down the road, but for right now, there's very little you guys can do, and so it's just not a lovely situation.
Yeah, just focus on yourself first and be supportive, really.
That's all you can do. But thank you so much for writing in, guys.
Thank you.
And we got some good questions on this episode. We got some really good ones. I'm glad we were able to dig into the bench a little bit and get them in there. And guys, please remember that even though you may have forgotten, because it's been a while since we've tackled questions hard, we are a question show. And so if you want to write in, it's at PodTherapyGuys@gmail.com. We're on Twitter at PodTherapyGuys. We're on Facebook, PodTherapy. And I think we're on Instagram as PodTherapy or PodTherapyGuys. And, of course, you can go to podtherapy.net, and there's a little anonymous box, and you can just click that, and you can write a question. And you're always, you're always invited to do that. So if we don't get to it immediately, that's just because we have a queue. But we try to pretty aggressively get to these questions. So we don't like them to wait forever. So we are at the end of the show with apologies, Patreons, and announcements. And Nick, I have some apologies to make.
I see that.
A few things to say here. I need to get it off my chest. I want to make amends to the universe.
Okay.
Dear historic Tempelhof Airport in Berlin, Germany, I'm sorry I implied that your new drive-through sex booths are owed entirely to former American President Ronald Reagan's effort to tear down the Cold War-era wall which once divided your great city. I'm sure many people are responsible for your brothel booths, not just Ronald Reagan.
I didn't even hear about that.
Yeah, they have drive-in sex booths.
I was talking about Ronald Reagan.
About the wall?
Here's the president?
That was...
That was of course I know about the sex booths.
Who doesn't? Mr. Gorbachev, get in this sex booth. Dear Earth, I'm sorry that when the report about eating healthier foods being necessary to prevent the effects of climate change came out, that I stopped caring about the end of our habitat. I wish I cared more about the rainforest than I do In-N-Out, but that would be a lie.
At least you're honest.
At least I'm honest about it. Dear Russia, I'm sorry that when... all these are location apologies. That's interesting.
They are.
Dear Russia, I'm sorry that when scientists announced that they had distilled vodka from the radioactive Chernobyl zone, that I said it was the most Russian thing I'd ever heard of. Manu from Brazil helped me learn how geography works. That Chernobyl is actually in Ukraine. And it was ignorant of me to think your country would be so flippant about a radioactive catastrophe. That is, until you totally ignored the nuclear missile meltdown that happened this week, and you ignored it for several days, imperiling your citizens. That is, in fact, the most Russian thing I've ever heard of.
Shots fired.
Namaste, Russia.
All right, we want to thank our Patreons who support the show. Thank you very much. And if you would like to support the show, you can do so at www.patreon.com/therapy. We have no new THERAPALs or THERAPODs this week.
You freeloading listeners, get in here and kick us a buck.
But we want to thank our bosses, the Elite 8 mysterious and shrouded Illuminati members of our fan club, the TheraProducers. Thank you, Smitty Scoop, Jake Schneider, Robert Brownie Jr., Ment, Chairman of the Board, Kayla Lansbury, David Data Scoop Violon, Judy Schneider, Nathan's Hot Dog Scoop, Dr. Ben, I'm a Terrible Golfer, Dawn, and ex-officio board member Ellie O'Dare.
If you'd like to hear this episode uncut and unedited and enjoy our spontaneous side projects, including our book club, you can go to www.patreon.com/therapy, and thank you for supporting mental health. That's all the time that we've got for this week's session. We want to thank our landlords, the Ice Cream Social Podcast, and thanks to those of you who contributed to our show today, and for Linda B for sponsoring my family into Canada. We really appreciate it. Remember, pod therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Share this episode with someone who needs it by opening this episode's description in your podcast app and copying and pasting the link provided into your social media. Don't forget, you can find us at facebook.com/podtherapy, on Twitter at PodTherapyGuys, and of course at patreon.com/therapy.
Do you want to submit a question to the show? Ask anonymously at podtherapy.net or email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. I'm Nick Tangeman.
I'm James T. Kirk.
Thanks, and we'll see you for your appointment next week.
Did you know there's lyrics to that? To the theme song of Star Trek?
Is it, this is the theme song to Star Trek?
I promise you, I'm saving that as a drop.
It's probably the best I've ever sang.
See you guys next time.